Hi, I've got a prescription for diabetes test strips. How much is the copay?
That could take me a while to calculate. In the meantime, you should think about over-the-counter Contour Next test strips. You get 35 for $19.99, and they're highly accurate. For full details, visit contournext.com/radio.
Welcome to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast. I'm Dani, your host, certified fertility awareness practitioner, functional nutrition counselor, and founder of the HA Society, and of course, an HA recovery coach who has walked where you currently are walking. This is the place to come if you care about getting your period regularly. This podcast aims to educate, inform, and keep you motivated on your period and HA recovery track. So let's dive in. But last thing, nothing on the show should be taken as medical advice, so please seek the advice of your physician. Beautiful. The HA Society is taking clients. Coach Ashley and I work one-on-one with HAs, as we call you, to help you figure out a plan and, of course, implement it and stay accountable. Whether you've worked with a health practitioner already and you just want to stay accountable and strategic with the plan that they've laid out for you, or you want to start from scratch looking at all the aspects of your recovery needs and to create a game plan to reach those needs, then we are definitely your girls. When you sign up to work one-on-one with one of us, we're going to go over your history, your biggest obstacles, ensure that we're taking into account your specific goals, and start making a plan to reach them. So those goals could be getting your period back, could be getting pregnant, could be getting back to exercise or sport, or simply working on your mindset around your body image and long-term recovery. We also can teach you the fertility awareness method. So if you want to learn that so that you have the skills you need to go out into the world on your own without fear of getting HA again, we have got your back. So our coaching packages are either weekly or bi-weekly and only a month at a time commitment. So you're not paying tons and tons of money for 5-6 months. It's month to month, which is awesome. Makes perfect sense for period recovery, right? So to learn about other women's experiences working with us and to apply for a coaching spot, plus ask any questions that you might have before getting started, just go to thehasociety.com/coaching. Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the HA podcast. It's been a little while since we really dove in with some recovery stories, as you guys know, but I'm extremely excited today to have with us Victoria Myers because she has a story and she's a practitioner. So we've got a bunch of knowledge bombs. We're going to do our best not to go over time, but Victoria owns a virtual private practice and online education center that specializes in empowering women to make peace with their food, heal their digestion and regulate their hormones. She's also the host of the Nourishing podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And I love that podcast. It's been around for actually a while.
Yeah, 5 years.
5 years. It helped me through my recovery. I know it's really valuable. So I definitely want women to know and go and listen to that one for their daily dose of motivation. And she's a registered dietitian and intuitive eating counselor. So welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much for having me, Dani. Thank you all for listening to today's episode. I am pumped to chat all the things we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited. But before we do, let's set some context. I want to know what's your story and what got you here today. Because I've listened to you. I know you have a story, but I probably just didn't scroll back far enough in the podcast or something like that. Yeah, I don't know if I know it. Maybe I do. I want the story.
This is such a good point. And to be honest, I'm like thinking in my own head, like, gosh, when was the last time I had a conversation about my own story on the podcast? So you're inspiring me. Maybe it's time to do an episode on that on my own show. So, my story is unique and also so incredibly not unique because so many of us women have similar struggles to what I have personally gone through. Like so many of those who are probably listening, my struggles actually started first with body image. And I can just remember being like a young girl and always comparing my body to those around me. I was very fixated on magazines and what they were telling us about like what a body should look like. And I just remember like always comparing, always judging my own body from a really, really young age. But that didn't manifest into specifically like altering how I ate until about 16 years old. And gosh, like what a pivotal time in your life when you're 16 years old. But in my own story, it was a especially challenging time in my life because my dad actually left for Iraq for 2 years. He was in the military my whole life and served in the Iraqi war during that time frame. So he was gone that time frame. My mom had started graduate school. My sister just left for college. So I just felt like really lonely, if I'm being honest, and out of control because of so many different factors going on in my life. And as a means to try to cope with what felt like was out of control, what did I do? I started to obsess over food in my body. And I'm honestly grateful for this time frame in my life because it's when I discovered like, hey, being a registered dietitian is like a career path. You can do this. My dream school, which was Clemson University, go Tigers, had the degree that I needed in order to become a dietitian. So it was like a really cool time in my life. I discovered cooking and I became obsessed with the Food Network and watching shows all the time. And also it was because I was obsessing over what is the right way to eat. How can I lose weight? This is really the first time in my life I started to specifically intentionally count calories and start to diet. And I did see a lot of weight loss, but that weight loss also came with a lot of emotional turmoil. I mean, people were constantly praising me for losing weight, how I looked. And of course, that just manifested into this like obsession with, okay, well, my body is obviously more applauded now. How do I continue this? And that honestly continued past high school into college, which again is the very challenging time. You're on your own for the first time. You're surrounded by other people who also struggle with food and body struggles. It continued as well in the first like 3 to 5 years of being a dietitian, because I don't know how many dietitians you've had on the podcast, but my goodness, our schooling is like a recipe for orthorexia, which is the unhealthy obsession with eating healthy. So it was like all these different factors of, I really wanted to control my food because I felt out of control in my life. I had never felt good enough in my body. And because I was going to school to be a dietitian and then became a dietitian, I was very much that person who was like fixated on eating perfect, doing everything right, having the body I was supposed to have. And that happened. It was about a 10-year period in total. And for me personally, what happened was after my honeymoon, I kind of woke up from it and was like, what is going on? Like, I cannot keep living this way. This is completely taken over my entire life. Food and body is all that I think about. And from there, I really started that journey to heal my relationship with food and then my body. And then it really honestly manifested itself in a lot of different ways in my personal life of how intuitive eating transformed the way I look at life. And then after a few years of going through the healing process myself, I started my practice, and honestly, the rest is history.
Amazing. You said a few things. So we're just going to dive right in. Well, first of all, yes, a lot of dietitians that have their own story on this show, but also a huge amount of our membership base or client base is we have like a membership support group, and we have a client base, and we do a lot of like mindset and relationship with food recovery stuff. And unsurprisingly, a lot of people do work in the nutrition space. Mm-hmm. And it's surprising at first, but then it makes a lot of sense when you really think about it. It does make a lot of sense. Draw those people in, or transform those people.
Well, we feel like everyone's looking to us in order to tell others how to eat. And that's one of the many, many reasons I love the self-care eating framework of intuitive eating, is that it's all about making you the own expert of your own body. It's not about like me as a dietitian telling you what you're supposed to do with food.
Yeah. Which is tough because people really want that, right? Will you make me a meal plan? Will you tell me exactly what to eat? And it's like, well, you think you want that, but you don't really want that, because you're not going to want to eat what I tell you to eat. It's not going to work that way.
Well, that's not sustainable in the long term either.
Exactly. Like you're not going to want to do it. Like it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be fun. It's stressful, the whole thing. So yeah. And I think you touched on like a really important piece that I love to bring up over and over again, which is that one of the biggest challenges was that like you're getting praise for you're doing to yourself, right? And which makes it very confusing. I think we even realize that that's exactly what's happening, but we're all more than happy to go down that path because all of the external validation. Like we just need this external validation. And it's been a recent, I'll be in the line at the grocery store. You know how there's like the magazines?
Of course.
At the line. And do you ever sometimes look at them on the cover and you sort of see it for what it is? Like in the moment of this person getting ready for this photo shoot, they're potentially the least healthy they've ever been. Strong chance. But we're looking at it as like it's being sold to us as a picture of health. So it's a complete lie.
Oh, it's lie.
Very confusing. And that was a recent moment where I was like, wow, no, like that's why it's so hard for us to work against this.
Oh yeah. Well, we have all these, like, it's not just messaging from one specific source. It is everywhere around us. I love that, like, saying that people will use that, like, we're swimming in the sea of diet culture. Cause I think it's a great example of, like, it really is true to the experience of being a human in this world, especially like living in America, as both of us do. And it is everywhere we go. But I totally agree, Dani. Anytime I see anything, including a magazine, I'm always thinking, what is the real story behind this picture? Not what are you seeing? And I think that when you start doing body image work and you start to learn about the unrealistic standards of media portrayals of women, especially, you can like really start to like look at things with curiosity instead of like, oh, why don't I look like that? Honestly, one of the first times I woke up to that was not magazines. It was just influencers, because I started working with a lot of Instagram influencers because they behind the scenes would be struggling with their relationships with food and body so significantly. They would have HA a lot of the times and not be telling their audience this, and so much compassion for them, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why that is, but that person struggling doesn't always share everything that's going on. Sometimes there is a portrayal that they need for their job or for what they're doing for work. And that's when I personally was like,
oh no, you cut out. You went, wait, it might be me.
Hello.
Okay. Say that again. When you personally were like,
sorry.
You were working with influencers. Sorry, I don't know what happened. You were working with influencers and you were seeing these issues show up more and more. And that's when you had a realization, and I missed the realization.
Yes. So when I started working with influencers was really, for me, more so than even magazines. The first time I was like, whoa, like what we're seeing is never the actual portrayal of like, what is the realities behind the picture that you're seeing, right? Because I started working with influencers and seeing firsthand that while they would be that person sharing their eating behind the scenes, they had HA, so they had a missing period. They'd be struggling significantly in their relationship with food in their bodies, and so much compassion for that person struggling. However, I do think it's important to like recognize that a lot of those people, again, you don't know the full picture of what's happening.
Yeah. So to get a little coaching insight or nugget from you, this is something that I think about a lot because it comes up a lot in conversations with people who are struggling. The comparison trap, right? Seeing people around us. So I hear this one a lot, right? There's someone similar to you in some way. Maybe it's your sister. She's my sister. She's genetically similar to me. Or there's someone, I'm a runner and other girls in my running group don't have this problem. You know, like there's a strong emphasis on who's similar to me and kind of cherry picking the reasons why our similarities mean that like this isn't really happening to me, or I don't really have HA, or there's probably other similar issues that people have this almost like this selective bias. But what they're not able to do is see all the ways that they're different from that person, but also like you just don't know the reality. And you're not looking at this with curiosity. You're looking at this through a lens of like, what can I see about this person that solidifies the narrative I'm trying to make in my head, which is denial, if any of that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. It's actually making me think of a client I'm working with right now. And we had that exact same conversation last week in our coaching session together, where she is recovering from HA. We've actually gotten 2 periods back successfully already. And what we've been talking a lot about is like, why did like her concerns are, why did I have to gain weight in order to get my period back when I see so many other women live in a smaller body and have a menstrual cycle? And what I shared with her, and I'll share with everyone listening, is that, you know, I think this is where that HA recovery piece is so much more than eating more and exercising less. Like there's so much underneath what it seems like of what you have to do to get your period back. There's working through that comparison and that judgment and that shame that we feel. And what we were able to discover for her was that we like dug into her past a little bit more to understand why she's constantly comparing her body to others. And we discovered like 2 specific instances of where she'd been said some shaming things about her bodies from others, and, you know, maybe said in innocent ways from others without the recognition of how like comments affect people. But they had a real impact on her from like a really young age. And even to this day, where she knows that she shouldn't compare, or like, you know, what's best for her body is going to be different from someone else's, she still had those lingering thoughts in the back of her head. So if anyone else is kind of struggling with that comparisonitis, there's often something of a root of where it all stems from, and understanding that can really help you have clarity of like, okay, this is why I'm struggling with this. And I can't let this continue to impact my day-to-day choices. I have to show up for myself in the moment, in the present, to do what is best for me.
Yeah. I love understanding why you're thinking what you're thinking.
I do too. It's like
that is favorite. Yes, it is my favorite. It's like, oh, interesting.
Why?
You know, but why? Yeah, but why? Yeah. You know, phrases like, I just don't think I should have to be this big. Like, interesting. Why? Or I just don't feel like I should have to gain any more weight, or I just don't think I should have to reduce how much I train. Or, you know, those are just very specific examples to recovery, but it's all around us, right? And we're so blinders on, narrowed in on the goal to be thin or whatever, that we don't even question where the belief is coming from. Mm-hmm. It's just true. Like, it's just true. And it's very hard for people to break that. I think that core memory work is so crucial. I have like I'd love to hear if you have a core memory. I certainly have one. I have a few, like most people, where and it's funny because they're not always like huge acute moments that
no, they were small little glimpses of a moment that stick with you.
And there's just some that you remember, but there were so many others. And I remember like my grandmother coming over to my house one day, and she was asking me how I get home from school. You know, fair enough. And I told her that I walk home from school. And she said, oh, that's good. It'll keep you trim. And I planted a seed in me and I remember thinking, oh yeah, cool. And from that day forward, instead of the way I would always be like, oh, you know, I have to walk home, and in Australia, it's like so hot. Then I just became like pro walking home, and I like loved it. And it was like one of my earliest memories of doing something in the pursuit of weight loss. And it's like, it was a very simple split-second moment that like planted a very deep, a root that is now very deep. And I'm curious if you have any of those. And I want to talk about it to like inspire people to kind of get thinking about it, because I didn't realize it until I started doing core memory work. And so at first you think, I don't have any like traumatic acute memories. Like my life was normal. My parents are still together. No one's like, I barely know anyone that's ever passed away, yada, yada. You're like, nothing's going on in my life. But when you try to think of a core memory and you can't, that's okay. Because I find when you go about your day, they start to pop up. You have a flash you remember, and you're like, oh my gosh, I think that's a core memory. So I want that for people listening. And I'm wondering if you have any to share.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I can definitely immediately identify a few. And again, probably can think of them pretty quickly off the top of my head because I do this work for a living. So much of you're like, I know exactly what that core memory is. I can think of two from like a really young age that always come up whenever I'm telling my story. And then there are some pretty acute, like bigger picture ones. Like I already, mentioned my dad going to Iraq. I also had my parents get divorced freshman year of college. Like all those little things were more bigger, but the smaller things that maybe as you shared up, people often don't think to question is, I remember in gymnastics class, recognizing that my thighs were bigger than some of the other girls. And I just remember like comparing and taking notes and be like, why don't I look like that? And then I also remember doing that at the pool. I remember very specifically the girls that I would compare my body to and just be like, that's interesting. My stomach doesn't look like that. And I'm sure there were specific comments made, never specifically about my body, because I did have thin privilege. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And yeah, I still, with that thin privilege, did often experience comparison in my head of like, I still don't look like that. I still don't have this body. And then as I got older, and especially I've already mentioned that story of when I was 16, I lost a lot of weight pretty quickly. That's when I started to get a lot of praise and validation. I remember so specifically my dance teacher pointing that out to someone and be like, oh, Victoria's lost some weight recently. Look at her. And there would be just like consistent small little comments like that really started to validate internally for me, weight loss is a good thing. Like you should have been smaller. All those like little thoughts that you had throughout your life of like, why doesn't my body look like that? They were right. You should have been smaller. Right. So it just kind of like solidified that like part of myself that was already questioning my body to begin with. And that's what, again, started the spiral of disordered habits for at least 10 years.
Hello, ladies. Just chiming in to tell you about the HA Society resource store. If you've been looking for helpful tools that can help you get your period back, kind of DIY without the price tag of one-on-one coaching or a super intense course, the resource store is the perfect place to start. Here you can try our recovery game planner to help you plan, execute, track, and fine-tune your HA recovery protocol, or download the audiobook version of our 7-day HA recovery commitment challenge so you can listen on the go. There's even fillable and printable HA journaling pages and our famous I got my period back mug, so you can get one as soon as you get your period back, and then you can drink from it every single month. So if you're ready to recover with the right resources and just get some cool stuff to help you through recovery, head to thehasociety.com/store to check it out. And remember that members of the HA Society get 50% off all items on the store. That's thehasociety.com/store.
Incredible. Yes, those are exactly the kind of thing that you need to see and not just blindly be like, oh, that horrible memory that happened that was true. You need to now look at it from a different curious lens, a different perspective. Of
that
like,
curiosity. I love that we're using
up about that.
Yeah, I love that we're using that word so much. It comes to mind to me as we often tell people to do a body lineage charting, which is where you're like writing out all the ways you've ever been informed about your own body and other people's bodies throughout your lifespan. And the reason that's so powerful, as you can imagine, is like you can so clearly see when you write it out like a timeline, like all the ways you've been informed about what your body should look like. And no wonder in the present day, you are struggling so much with all these thoughts that are swirling in your head constantly about food in your body. And I don't do that to like have people fixate on the past, because I don't want to spend too much time there, but rather to, again, acknowledge like, of course you feel this way. Like, look at what's happened. So we can't change the future and the way you treat yourself now and into the future without like acknowledging some of what's happened in the past, which is that core memory you're speaking to.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good segue into, so we acknowledge, things happened and now we're here and we're aware that we want to change and we want to like get our lives back. What do you think are some of the important things to be doing every day to help actually change and rewrite that narrative?
I love this question. So many thoughts come to mind. So I'm going to try not to like spew all of them at you guys. Yeah. But the first thing I immediately thought of is, just because you have a thought doesn't make it true. And what I mean by that is to think that as you work on healing your relationship with food in your body, and for everyone here, I'm assuming it's so that they can get their periods back and their lives back. For you, you're going to have negative thoughts about your body continue. I personally, as a practitioner, believe it's unrealistic to tell people that they'll never have negative thoughts about their body again. What I try to encourage instead is having, as we've already discussed, curiosity and question those things rather than just to take them on as your truth. Because that's usually what we do, right? Like we hear a thought, we're like, oh shit, my body sucks. I need to go fix it. I need to go count calories again, diet, exercise more, whatever, like the action you believe you should take to fix the thought. Instead, what I would encourage is thinking, just because I have a thought doesn't make it true, nor does it mean it has to be the authority over me. So instead, can I question this thought? Where did I learn this? Why do I feel this way? A simple why works well too. And just start to like question that. And I think over time, what you can do is start to reframe those thoughts. One of my favorite ones is, I call it the but gratitude reframe. So if you have a thought like, oh, I hate the way my arms look, you can say, I hate the way my arms look. And when you hear that thought in your head, you can say, but at least it allows me to hug my loved ones, like, and just adding on. So it's acknowledging that just because you have the thought doesn't make it true. It's learning how to question thoughts when they happen instead of taking them over as authority on you, and then learning how to reframe those thoughts. And I do think there's a lot of power to affirmations on a daily basis, gratitude writing. I also think there's a lot of power in just consistently doing body respect practices day in and day out. But I think the thought process work is probably sometimes the harder aspect that I actually would rather someone like begin with that first.
Totally. I like that. And when you are taking care of yourself and like staying on top of these things, it kind of creates momentum and allows it to be easier and to build on top of it. And we feel like we're not making progress, but you realize like, look how much quicker, how much faster you're getting out of that spiral now. Like you're able to pull yourself out, throw yourself a life raft. And that's more realistic than being like, you're going to be able to never have those thoughts again. It's like, exactly. How can you learn? Ashley, my coach always says this, learn to navigate the thoughts, not have them navigate you.
I love that so much. And it's going to be so much more helpful to have that type of mindset of like, learn how to navigate your thoughts. Because again, like it's unrealistic to say you're never gonna have a negative body thought. Like maybe if we didn't live in a sea of diet culture, that could happen. But since it's being bombarded to us on the day to day, like again, you
must be resilient.
Yeah, you have to be resilient. You can't expect for you like to never have these things pop up and be like, oh, like I wish I could look like that. Like, of course you're going to have those thoughts. And instead of like beating yourself up, which I see a lot of times, I see people beating themselves up for having the negative thoughts once they realize that they like shouldn't have them. I'm like, no, like instead, like it's okay to have them. Be compassionate with yourself. Like that's that inner part of yourself that is always going to have that desire, and learn how to like work with it and work against it rather than work for those thoughts.
Yeah, it's like anyone doing something against the norm, right? And it's so funny to me because so many of us pursue weight loss or body composition change, yada, yada. Like whether we realize it or not, in the pursuit of being seen, being special, being like popular, known, loved, like maybe I'll have more friends if, whatever. But all we're actually doing is pursuing fitting in and being like normal. And it's those of us who actually question things and think about things and try to make change that actually, are the people who are thought leaders and get, the satisfaction and quite frankly, like love sometimes that we're actually looking for. Like I can say that no one ever thanked me for trying to lose weight, or I never helped anyone change their life while trying to lose weight. But stopping that and like living my life the way that I want to, and being comfortable, like spending more energy on other things than on energy trying to lose weight and tracking my macros and yada, yada, like that has created a much more fulfilling life, which is ironic because that's what I was looking for in the first place. You know what I mean? Like there's an irony there.
Oh, absolutely. I'm like over here nodding my head because I completely relate to that. I was so desperate to have a fulfilled life where I was doing something meaningful. And I felt as if it had to be this one specific narrative of what that meant. And, as we've been talking about, I mean, it's not completely all on us, right? There's a media portrayal of like, hey, if you're thin, you can have success and happiness and that perfect marriage and perfect friends and all these things. And like, it's funny, as you mentioned, Dani, to look back and be like I achieved all of that with the exact opposite of what they told me. And to do that, which is super ironic, but so true to what I've learned most people actually experience, is when you make peace with food in your body and you actually do the work to heal that relationship with yourself, it opens the door to so many different areas in your life and actually living fulfilled because you're not living in your head so much.
Yeah, totally. And I want to like re-emphasize what you were saying because it is important. You're right that we should, have compassion for ourselves. It's not our fault. We absolutely were hardcore sold this vision. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're here and seeing it at all, right? Like you're tuning into this show, you're like looking into these things. It's amazing that you're here.
Amazing. Like be proud of yourself. Even if you haven't made it one single change yet, the fact that you are listening and starting to question is like the hardest of all. I really do think that. I think the acknowledgement that you struggle is hands down the hardest part, because that's when you like have these, like, I remember like being in bed and lying there after our honeymoon. And I always remember my honeymoon because I restricted so heavily leading up to my wedding. And then I binge ate the entire honeymoon. Like I have no other memories of my honeymoon other than like binge eating. And I remember coming back and being like, gosh, this sucks. Oh shit, I have an unhealthy relationship with my body and food choices. And that, again, that is definitely the hardest part. But once you do that, it just, gosh, that door is open. It flies open actually to all the possibilities of what your life can be. And sure, healing and recovery is tough work, but like we're resilient people and we can do hard things, as Glennon Doyle always says. Yeah. Love Glennon Doyle so much. And I genuinely believe that. I think hard things things that challenge us, things that show us our resilience are the things in life that really matter. And HA recovery, healing your relationship with food in your body is such a great example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it completely redirects the direction of people's lives. It's amazing. I remember like the first time I ever heard the concept of like, it was Noelle Tarr of Well-Fed Women. And she said, because I had looked into like, why is my period missing? Right. And I found on this episode on it. And she had said, oh no. And she had said, what, like, why do you need to lose weight? Who said you have to be thin? And I remember just being like, what? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like I look back at that because I was completely brainwashed to not, like there was obviously one brain cell open to listening to it, but for the most part, I was just like, no, that's ridiculous. And it kind of made me look back and think, that's how people get in cults. Like we watch cult documentaries and we're like, how are they not seeing this for what this really is? Like that guy has like, you're one of 20 wives.
Happen. Yeah. With beauty standards and diet culture and the thin ideal.
Same thing.
Absolutely. Also, Dani, by the way, I love cult documentaries so much. So glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. It's like, well, but it is the same thing. Like you're one of 20 wives. Like, how are you not seeing that? But we're going through the exact same thing. And it's not until the first person goes, did you know it's weird to be one of 20 wives? And you're like, no, it's not.
You speaking to the fundamentalist Mormon documentary that just came out?
Yeah, but I feel like it's like a classic.
Last week.
Oh yeah.
It's fresh in my mind. I'm like, girl, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so does like at least 80% of people listen. But yeah, I mean, it's the same like mechanism in our brain. Like no one ever told, like you've never heard a different perspective. So you must search for different perspectives and you must reform an opinion based on everything you're hearing versus just the last thing that you heard.
Yes. Which also makes me think of like a good point to bring up is like some people listening probably are almost rejecting this idea, right? Or being unwilling to truly embrace it yet. And I also just want to validate that that's normal, right? There's definitely going to be a period where you're like, why? And this isn't true. And I remember that happening for a brief moment in my own story. And I like rejected, I like dug in harder to clean eating, feeling like, okay, just one last time. I think that's when I did my last hurrah with dieting was the keto diet, which was like the worst of all of them. And I was like, once I was done with that, I was finally like, okay, I have literally done them all. None of this works. This isn't the solution I'm seeking. And what is intuitive eating.
Yeah. But to get here, you have to go through all that stuff, right? So, but I'm grateful because I wouldn't be here without that. So good. So good. Okay. I want to be very respectful of your time. So I appreciate you sharing, giving some tidbits. I think this is an extremely helpful episode for people. I'm wondering who listening might be best to come and check out your stuff and work with you if they're interested, all that good stuff.
Oh, thanks for asking. So honestly, like everyone who loves this show, if you guys love this show, you're going to love the Nourishing Women podcast. We touch on HA quite a bit, but we also talk about digestion. And honestly, more than anything, we spend a lot of time talking about how to make peace with food in your body through intuitive eating, which is the self-care eating framework we teach, and body image work. We talk a lot about body image because, as I was sharing with you, Dani, I am very much not a shallow, like I don't like shallow conversations. I don't want to talk about the weather. I want to like dig in deep and like immediately talk about your relationship with your body. It's just who I am. And I'm so grateful to have a podcast to be able to like share that with people, because I think people get a sense of like who I am as a result of that. But that's the first place I always tell people, like, just go to the podcast. It's a great place to get to know us. And if, as you're listening, you resonate with what you're sharing, we have so many different ways to work with people. We actually do have an HA online course. It's called Get Your Period Back Playbook. We also have beginner's guide courses to intuitive eating. We have a meal planning guide. We have all these like different tools to utilize to help you understand not only how to get your period back, but again, how to live a life of food and body peace. And the two main things that we do is that we do a lot of one-on-one work. And I say we, because I have a team of dietitians myself seeing clients. And then we also have a group coaching program called Food and Body Peace Playbook. And that's a great fit for people who are looking for a community of other people to unlearn, like we've been talking about today, and relearn a whole new way of living through intuitive eating. So those are our favorite two ways that we really work with people. But like I said, we actually have a variety of different offers and resources just to help any person in any stage that they're at in their own journey.
Awesome. Options, guys. Heaps of options.
Yes.
At a minimum, Nourishing Minds podcast, Nourishing Minds Nutrition podcast.
This is confusing, and we're actually going to change the name as a result of this, because we hear this consistently. It's Nourishing Women podcast, although I am changing the name to Nourishing Minds, but the practice is called Nourishing Minds Nutrition. And it's confusing. So we've I think at the end of this year or beginning of next year, we're going to change the name. So okay. When people listen to this in 2023, that's going to be correct.
I'll put the link in the show notes, guys.
Yes.
How about that? And I think it's like it's required reading, right? Required listening for anyone listening to this show. It's a great companion. So Thank you so much for joining.
And you guys can listen to Dani on my podcast, because you were on recently. It was such an incredible conversation about like what weight gain really means in HA recovery. And we can put that in the show notes too, because that was an incredible conversation. And I love that you have like a membership where you're helping people, because that community aspect to me is one of the most beneficial ones.
Yes. You are not alone. You are not alone. You're one of many.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Yes. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today, guys. Please subscribe to the podcast. And if you could head to iTunes specifically and leave a rating or review, that would help so much, because it makes it easier for other people with HA who are Googling around to find the podcast really easily. So if you do that, you're doing a service to all of the women